Hi, everybody. Welcome back to this. I'm your host, Shauna Griffiths. And as always, we're bringing you real talk with a real leader. Before we get into that, I want to give a quick shout out and thank you to our founding partners, CMD Agency, Felicia Hall Allen and Associates, and 6 to 8 Digital. So for today's episode, folks, I'm really excited to introduce to you a new friend of mine, George Swisher, who is the CEO and co-founder of ChangeForce.ai. So even though he doesn't really want to talk about the business that much, we're going to do that. And then we're going to jump into, really talking about his evolution and the impact and leadership, which I think we have so much that can be learned from George. So George, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Oh, good.
Have a good chat.
So folks, I always give you context to how I know the guests. And so George and I were introduced by a wonderful guy named Joel Kim, who I know from at some point in our careers, they overlapped and I got to know him a bit. And he so kindly reached out one day and said he was watching, and listening to the podcast. And so brought George forward and we had an awesome call. George, I will tell you, halfway through that call, I was like, oh God, I don't know if George wants to come on the show. So you psyched me out.
No way. Of course.
And I'm so glad to have you here. So before we get into your story, I would love for you to give context to the audience about your role and the company. What are you all doing? Who do you do it for? And all of that.
Okay. So quick snapshot. ChangeForce kind of monitors customer and employee sentiment to help predict where there are problems of achieving your company objectives. And the way that we do that is we plug into your existing softwares where you're communicating, so things like Slack or MS Teams, CRM tools, things like this, and we're able to analyze the sentiment of messages and map it to achieving specific business objectives. And those can be anything from how to retain the best talent that you have in your organization to improving win rate or reducing churn of customers. So very kind of wide range of the types of objectives that we can analyze and kind of predict some problems. I think for me, my role is to I kind of run the product side, so help be the mad scientist and build the technology and try to replicate what a human does in a robot, which is fun. And I also spend a lot of time out working with customers and speaking and things like this to help kind of just build the awareness of some of the things that we're doing and why we're doing them. So that's where I spend my time usually.
Got it. And so who are the type of companies that you usually work with?
So we have a range of enterprise level customers that we work with. And so where they may have very big initiatives, we may work with a specific department or a business unit that is trying to achieve something. And then we just released early this year being able to work with small and medium businesses. So we built more of a starter kind of self-service type of technology where if you're in kind of 50 people to a couple thousand employee size company, now you can plug into an AI software that really helps you give you a good utility as a leader to achieve your goals.
Got it. And one of the things that stood out to me when we talked, folks, I have these calls prior to getting on and recording, and I like frantically take notes and usually get some great sound bites. And so I got some great ones from you, George. And one of them, you really said that one of the driving forces behind having this and providing this for people is you help them to be able to, you can detect problems before they even know that they exist. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, the basis is that, there's always kind of conversations that are going on in the organization that you may not be aware of. And so if I am, primarily we work with the leadership team. So we're not like an employee-based system. We have 1 to 5, maybe 10 users that are executives in an organization or department leaders, things like this. And it's really hard to understand how people are feeling, both of your customers, your employees, and your vendors, in helping you achieve what you're trying to achieve. So if I am the CEO of an organization, excuse me, and I realize that I need to really focus on keeping my current customers, which is a big problem that a lot of people have. And in doing that, I'm relying on so many people throughout the organization to ensure that our customers are happy, our teams are happy, the suppliers that help us produce great products or services. And part of the challenge is when you're sitting at that leadership level, you can't know everything that's going on and all the communication that's taking place. And so you're relying on layers of people. And much like when, we were kids and you sit around in a circle, if you tell one story and the next kid tells the next kid, tells the next kid, by the time it comes back around, it's completely different, right? And so what's amazing to me now is that technology really allows us, especially with artificial intelligence, you really can decipher context from messages that people are sending in email and direct messaging systems. And you can start to kind of break it down and understand not only whether it's positive or negative sentiment or maybe keywords, which we can kind of see now, but you can use a sentence or a paragraph inside of a Slack message and relate it to a specific objective that I'm trying to achieve. So if I go back to, I'm trying to ensure that I don't have any of my customers leave, I may have some specific objectives that I know if we're doing really well, I won't lose my customers. Well, the technology can actually relate these messages that are happening in thousands and thousands and thousands, across, a day, a minute, a week, a month, and be able to connect the two together and say, well, based on the fact that you're trying to achieve this objective around your customers not leaving, here's the sentiment that we're seeing related to that, and it's scoring it in that the behaviors that are happening are most likely going to churn a customer, or they're most likely not going to churn a customer. And so it gives you this kind of indicator in real time where you can say, wow, we just looked at the last 2 months, the last 1 month, the last week, and we can kind of see that among our 5 or 6 objectives within retaining customers, 3 of them are scoring really low. So why don't we use that to figure out and diagnose why that is going on in the organization or in my customers, so I can get ahead of it, right? Because that's the challenge, is you don't want to know after it's happened. I think, there's a lot of cool, tools out there that people use to analyze customer relationships. And I think we're not combating those things, but it's more about what's all the information you're not paying attention to? And what if someone could actually decipher that information and give you 60% accuracy that you might lose a customer? 30%, any percent, right, gives me a leg up to try to get ahead of it. And I think that's the idea of what we're able to do with technology and what we've focused on with building, ChangeForce.
Yeah. It's so incredible. I think when I think about the amount of times, whether it's a company I've worked for or the clients that I've had, where they're, part of a conversation is, I don't know why we're not making money. I don't know why we're not, retaining a client. I don't know why they went away. So it's so great as you're saying that. I'm like remembering all of those, times that has come up. So it sounds like it could be such a powerful tool, and we do talk about so much about impact, but it all comes down to like, how are you impacting the people and the brands that we're all, the companies that we're working for. So,
and we have a lot of information we're looking at, right? And that's the double-edged sword we have now, is there's just so much information. And the way I look at it is, I love the idea of being able to pinpoint exactly what customer is going to leave or what person with my organization is causing friction. I think there's a ton of tools out there that are doing that, and people and experts and consultants. But to me, the snowball melts from the outside in. And so when you can see a halo effect of very big challenges that we're able to predict and say, well, customer churn, or listening about even, your most valuable employees leaving. That is a contributor to customer churn. People leave, customers leave with them, right? So if you're able to get ahead of those things and not worry so much about the person, but more worry about the practice that you have around objectives to retain those most talented people. And what is the sentiment around that? What is it, the sentiment among your customers and the retention of your best people? I mean, they're directly related to each other. So if you can look at it from that lens and then go in and say, okay, let's dive deeper and figure out, we realize that there's a trend in a specific business unit or office around this sentiment that's scoring low. Let's go in now and have some leadership, workshops. Let's get some consultants in. Let's go ahead and, try to intervene and dive deeper with specific types of surveys or workshops or interviews or whatever it is, right? So I love this side of the on the ground solving the problem, but I think you can predict some of those things much earlier on. If someone's just looking at it, anonymously looking at the bigger picture and saying the ship's kind of going this direction, let's try to get it back before it's too late.
Yeah.
I see too many people trying to solve the problem after it's already happened. And it's like, well, you saw the signs. If I walk the halls every single day of a company and I ask every single person a bunch of questions, I probably could have figured it out. That's what we essentially decide to do with technology, is instead of the instinct of what you can hear as a person talking to other people, the advancements within AI has really allowed you to kind of figure out some of those same gut feelings you have within reason and within a certain level of accuracy, but pretty close, and that's a great way to feed you into the right direction and say, pay attention over here,
Right. Yeah. Definitely, it's like answers to the test. How many times are we asking for,
it may not
who's got
be
the answers to the test?
Yeah, it's not the answers to the it's not the answers to the questions, but it's like the very specific cliff notes that most likely can help you get to the answer faster. That's the way I would think about it.
Okay.
Right?
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. But I think you also, from what I know of your background, you've had a tremendous career. You made some big, bold moves early on in your career, spent a ton of time in consulting, which I think probably has helped you on your path. And so, now you're in a role in tech, but the way you talk about it, it's, an approach that's, I think, sounds like it's been very much influenced by your own journey. So I would love for you to share with the audience a bit about your evolution. I really think there's so much great stuff that we can learn from. I love the way you talk about it. So if you can talk about that, I would love that.
Of course. Yeah, listen, I feel like the best businesses sometimes come out of something you couldn't solve or find a solution to. And I feel very fortunate to be able to build a technology that was solving a problem that I had in the services business. And whether I was a leader in an organization or whether I was helping leaders in an organization, being able to, discover the skeletons in the closets, sometimes is what's needed, and so I think I had the luxury to be able to take what I was doing in consulting or take what I was doing as a leader to discover where problems were by sitting and talking to people and replicate that to the best of my ability today, that could kind of do the same fact finding by looking at digital communications. So I think from a background perspective, I've always been technology curious and very fearless of technology. And so even though I was in the service business, I started in the marketing communications industry, running agencies and building one and exiting that at an early age and going into consulting with holding companies and agencies to help them be better professional service businesses. And even early on, when I look at the first company I started, which was a service business, we had built our own internal technology to help us with project efficiency, because at the time a lot of these tools didn't exist. And it wasn't that we built it because we wanted to build a technology. It was built out of a need and the ability to have foresight into accomplishing things that we needed to accomplish or scheduling things or whatever it was. And so we didn't like what we saw out there, so we said we're going to build it ourselves. And what that allowed us to do was to build a company that was a tech-enabled company. And And I think that's, was like that initial path of where I just constantly always used and found tools or built tools that could help me in my own businesses I was building and selling, or exiting and doing different things with, or again, going in and discovering a problem that someone needed help around growth or around, profitability, and kind of pinpoint where I should focus that effort. And that's how, for me, I've always been so focused on how do you move the needle really quickly in an area that you can do really well. And I just always had that lens through the 20 plus years I've been kind of dabbling in these. And for me, I'm restless. I like to, like I said earlier, like be in the mad scientist role a bit. And though I've been in some roles where I've led and ran businesses and be responsible for leading people, but coming down to it, it's I really enjoy finding where there's something that's a friction point and how do you solve that. And so that kind of led me to where I am today, where doing the consulting business, it was a challenge, to figure out what was going on. And in spending time walking the halls of companies that were 30,000 people, 100,000 people, it's impossible to figure out these things. And so I ended up building a very simple prototype to help me better at the consulting, and then realized maybe there's an opportunity to solely focus on the technology side, and how can we take that and put it in the hands of some people and help them be better. And so, over that 20 years, it kind of gave me the ability to, to move fully into technology. But at heart, I definitely understand the service business, and that's, where I have an expertise. I just think I was lucky enough to be willing to experiment and try things and use different technologies and piece them together and go, wow, this is actually going to do X for me. And that just became the utility on my belt that got me where I was trying to go, either individually or as a, running a business or consulting.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things that stood out to me from our first conversation was when we were talking about this, you had mentioned that same thing that you said a moment ago about fearlessness and this like desire for freedom. And, you were talking about that entrepreneurial space.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes when people hear oh, I'm leading this company and I used to be a consultant, people can almost overlook the fact that that's been an entrepreneur's journey. And so, now you're leading a company, but everything that you talked about along the way, you were like finding a new path, creating solutions. You said you were a bit, I think you used the word restless. So, I think I would love for you, as people are hearing that and they're, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur, or, how do I be fearless like
Right.
that? Is there anything that you can share kind of about that aspect of it?
Of course. Yeah, the benefit of being an entrepreneur is somewhat freedom, I would say, depending on what stage you are in entrepreneurship. You always have a boss no matter how you look at it. But, for me, I learned early on that I didn't like to be told what to do. Let me say that, phrase it. I realized that I had a block if someone tried to tell me what to do versus give me an opportunity to experiment, try, to go in a direction that maybe everyone was uncomfortable with, but to give me the freedom to do that. And, earlier on, I started working at a very young age. I was in the workforce at 18, in a career role at 18. And, I did try to work through big corporations, and I realized that the freedom wasn't there for me. And though the paycheck was nice and the perceived stability was nice, the bureaucracy and the coloring within the lines and all these other parts that come along with it, I was okay to sacrifice the stability or the guaranteed paycheck or knowing I can leave at 5 p.m. every day and it's going to be there tomorrow. All those things, it didn't matter to me. What mattered to me is the ability that I had to be free in the way that I could think or try things, and I wasn't always the most probably pleasant to work with, because I was so focused on trying to solve something, and I use that mad scientist analogy a lot because that's the mindset that I was always in, and so I love entrepreneurship for its own reasons, but there's a downside to it, and I think a lot of people. There's a lot of hardship. You sacrifice a lot of time with relationships, between family, friends. And so, I more just look at financially, there's not always in the green. A lot of times it's in the red, and so balancing both sides of it. And I feel like what's most important when people ask me, or people say, I want to be an entrepreneur, I say, are you sure? Are you sure that's what you want? Do you understand both sides of it? Because if you are not, a very big risk taker, I don't believe entrepreneurship is the best path for someone, because it requires the risk adverse side of it is important. If you're, I believe that I will survive no matter what scenario I am. Like, I am confident that I will figure it out and get the hell out of that hole the way I need to.
Yeah.
And that's just something that was instilled in me at a very young age. And when I say fearless, that's kind of what I mean, is that, I'm calculated. It's not like I'm reckless, but the idea. And so to me, when I see great entrepreneurs, they innately have that ability and that skill and that risk tolerance to just run at something. And if they fail and they get their last buck in their pocket, or they have no money in their pocket, they'll figure it out, And on the flip side, there are people who just don't operate that way. And I always think of, like, we all have operating systems. We're used to computers. There's Mac and PC and Linux. They all operate differently. We all have the same, there's operating pieces to us, and you have to figure out what is your operating system. If your operating system is, not taking a lot of risk, wanting, okay with little freedom and all these other pieces, you can be incredibly successful in an environment that hosts that. For the person who doesn't work that way, you go the opposite direction, or you're right down the middle, right? You want something that gives you a little freedom, but you also need to have a little bit of structure, And so I feel like that's a big part of, I learned early on that's who I was. And leaving a very lucrative job, was very stable, to start a company was a risk, but I didn't think I had any other choice. And I think that was just a mindset that I've always had. Even as a young kid, I was thinking that way.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the things that stood out to me when we spoke, and I just really appreciate and admire about you and the way you operate is you have this very conscious approach to your journey, and you're very aware of these things, and when you were saying that, you're just also really honest. I might not have been that pleasant to work around because I was so fixated on this area. And so, I think sometimes we can almost be lost in this, the reality of our situations. And so it's great to hear someone, and to see you as an example of someone who's really been honest with yourself about what you need, about, and then I think it sounds like that's really helped to inform the way you moved forward. And there's an element there's an element of being honest with ourselves, and then, well, what do we do about it? It's like you didn't force yourself to sit there and be miserable. You were like, okay, I'm going to do something about this to help myself continue on in my journey in a way that is true to who I am. So, I think sometimes people look at people and are like, how did they get there? You said earlier, I'm lucky. You're not lucky.
Yeah.
Maybe you are a bit lucky,
right.
But I think you also have had some of these markers that I think are really important. And that's part of what I love our audience to be able to hear, is kind of like, oh, all right, well, maybe I could dial that up, or have I asked myself those type of questions?
Yeah, I feel like a great piece of advice I got a long time ago was that you have to figure out what you are unwilling to compromise. And once you figure out what that is, your decision making of where you go and how you go about it just seems so much simpler. And for me, I realized what I was unwilling to compromise, and for me, it was freedom. It was, having control of me, that I couldn't, if there was a ceiling to a role, like these are things that just I wasn't willing to compromise on that. And I was confident enough to know that I would either find a place that would nurture that, or I would create one. And I think that's such an important skill for, leaders today, and also our young leaders. Like, you can't research and figure out everything, but if you've got some basic principles of like, I'm not willing to be treated a certain way, or I'm unwilling to have a limitation around this specific skill today that I want to be really good at, then why would you compromise it? Find or create the place that you don't have to compromise it. If it only lasts for 2 weeks, who cares? If it lasts for 10 years, great. It doesn't matter. Yeah. And for me, it's been this ping-ponging around that I've just always stayed true to that. And even as a kid, my mom was just visiting here, and so it reminds me of, as a kid, she would always say to me, you can do that when you get older. And I would say, why? I don't want to. I want to do it now. Right? And I think that was just like, and she makes fun of me now because we sit down, she always tells you stories of how I was just unwilling to wait until later because, I wanted to try. I wanted to do that. And not that everybody should think that way, but, these are important emotional parts of becoming an effective entrepreneur or effective leader that, to me, outweighs all the training in the world that you can go through. If you can figure this kind of stuff out, you end up attracting the right people around you. You end up making choices that you're unwilling to compromise on certain principles. Like, these are the things that I think help you naturally navigate. I don't think I didn't build a 20-year roadmap.
No. I
didn't even have any roadmap. I just stuck to principles and just kind of ping pong around and said, oh, shit, that didn't work. I'm going to go this way, and you got to be comfortable doing that, in any role.
No, it's so great. I love when you said that. It reminded me of, there's a woman who I met along the way, and we've become friends, Andrea Minkow. And at one point she said to me that in her life and her journey with her wife, one of the things that they used as a gut check was, what's the most important thing about, like, in this decision for us? And so it was something that as soon as she said it, I was like, wow. And so it's been kind of like my North Star, my version of checking myself. I wrote it down, what you said, figuring out what you're unwilling to compromise. And that was my version of doing that along my journey. And I still do that. And it's like, what's the most important thing to me in this decision? And so, I do think it's really helpful that you have that phrase you can use for yourself to, again, I called it a gut check. That's also, kind of a similar thing. So yank my own chain kind of thing.
Well, and I think it's such an important trait for yourself. And even in everyday life, it's such an, I won't say it's easy is the wrong word, but it's such a useful way to look at everything. And your path ends up turning into naturally where it should go. And I'm a firm believer in that. I think you can't force things to go certain ways. That's where it goes wrong, because you end up compromising something to get something else, and that's where it gets out of whack. And so I think it's important for an audience that's listening to something like this, is that's where you can have the most impact, is like once you understand where you can be the best. Or you and I had a great conversation around I was okay with not being great in every scenario, whether it be working for someone, whether it be, running my own company, whether it be consulting, this tech company, it doesn't matter. I think I've learned that I'm not the best at every scenario. Just because I'm a CEO and a co-founder, it doesn't mean that I'm that role in every single scenario. Sometimes I'm not the best. I know that I don't play nice in the sandbox. I know that about myself, right? So if you put me in a room where I have to do that, I'm going to fail. Yeah. So I just try to go towards the ones that, are okay with the fact I don't play nice in the sandbox, because they're looking for someone like that to enter the room, whatever the role is I'm playing. And so I think it's important for leaders to realize that you, no matter what skills you learn, it doesn't apply to every situation. I think it's better. I would rather have someone work with me who knows exactly what situation they're really good in, so I can just use them for that, everything else to me, I don't, if you know 20 different things, but you're awesome at 2 and okay at 18, I'll take the 2 all day long. I don't care about the other 18. Yeah.
Yeah. I found something really, as I've observed leaders that I respect, is that often they have that trait, and then they don't just know that they're good at those 2 things and they're not so good at those other things. They also make sure that they have the people around them that can fill those voids.
Of course.
And so, I think that's really key. I mean, I've been around people who, do the opposite, and it's a train wreck very quickly.
Yeah.
It's like, you're right. One person can't be the answer for everything.
Yeah. And there's a difference between, traits and skills, right? And I think skills are learnable. I think traits are things you have, and how do you embrace those things? And the ones you don't have, you just don't have. It's okay. I think it's hard for us to learn everything. And we talked about this, like, sea of sameness. Like, I am so fearful of this happening where everybody thinks they need to blend together with everything. I don't think that's realistic. I think we lose innovation. We lose, uniqueness. We lose, people who are incredibly passionate about something, like unwilling to not do something about that passion. Like, these are critical traits that we would just, suppress. And I think that's scary to me, and, and to me, skills you can learn, and apply them differently. But I think traits are just critical. And I think that's, to me, like, when I look at the traits that I had, I've always been really good at sniffing out the bullshit. And that's what, if I put it into business terms, it's sentiment. Like, that's why I came back around to, I was like, wow, this is a trait that I have. This is not a skill. This is a trait, to sniff out things. And how do I use that same trait to sniff out whatever needs to be sniffed out, right? And I think when we talk about skills and traits, I feel like, to me, the skill was learning how to apply technology to that trait of sniffing things out, not the other way around. And that's what I would hope that I can share with people, or through this story, is that embracing those is so critical. Like, so critical. Embrace your traits and learn skills all day long, but embrace the traits. The power of them is so much greater than the 50 skills or 100 skills you can learn.
Yeah, absolutely. You've done a really good job of, I think, articulating for us these things that have, helped you get through. And I remember when we talked, you were sharing a bit about a blind spot. And I think sometimes it's really helpful when people hear, like, what is a blind spot? And, like, if you could share with us, what was that? But more importantly, how have you moved through it or worked with it?
Yeah, no, it's a, I feel like a good analogy is, for me personally, and this is not for everybody, is I'm kind of like one of those racehorses, and they put those, like, blinders on the side of them, where I just see the track, like, I don't see anything else. And so, it's the blind spot for me is actually the blind spot. Sometimes, for me, I just don't see some of the non-intellectual side of things, and it's a good and a bad thing. It's why I most likely have the confidence that I could survive anything, because I can just turn it off and go, this is where I'm going to go. This is what needs to be done. No emotion. It's all aside, right? But the downside is you run over people, and you piss off a lot of people, and you don't take things in consideration that could empower people, or unmotivate them. And that's always been a blind spot for me, is that I can get just so my path to something can be so clear to me that I don't see anything else. And even though it may get to the greatest impact, or to what's defined as a success, it's at almost any cost emotionally. And I think that's a dangerous blind spot that I have. And as I've gotten, more mature in work and in life, I've, maybe it was, 98.2% before, and now it's, maybe 90-10, it's getting better, but that's a blind spot. And so what I try to do is now fill my life up with people who help me see that or have that side to that can communicate with me in a way I hear it, to see a different point of view where maybe we won't get to the goal in the timing or the budget or the success level, but 80% of it is okay because of all these other factors around empowerment or emotional intelligence or being conscious of other people, and not being a lone ranger, right? Those are things that I've definitely learned, and I would say even in our business today, I feel very thankful for our co-founder Nabil, because he has some skills that I just don't, and traits that I just don't have. I just don't see things the way that he does, and there's times I get a little tap on the shoulder, like, hey, we're on a path, but like it's gonna get rocky on this side for me if you can't just like slow down for a little bit and let these other things happen for people. And I'm like, okay, you're right. Like let's take a step back, and that's okay. So I would say that's been a learning journey for me to not only surround people around me to fill that blind spot, but also to understand who I will listen to, because I feel like, as humans, we hear things differently, and like I'm a person that can't be told what to do, but you can persuade me. And there's some people who can't be persuaded; they have to be told what to do. And so, for me, I've surrounded myself with people who know how to persuade me. The art of distraction, the art of persuasion. Like they're really good at it, and they help me see things that I wouldn't see. Because I don't, that's not the way that I operate. So that's how I think filled it is being truthful, that I know I can be stubborn and blind, but I can get us somewhere, but there's going to be some cost to it. And that cost isn't always as beneficial, and you got to trust some people around you. And I've learned to put those people around me in life in general. Yeah.
Yeah. I literally can't even express how grateful I am that you've shared so openly about this, because just about all of it, because I mean, this is the kind of thing that I think that we need to be able to talk about. And so that, again, it's that learning. I think, I see so many people who think that being successful or, leading a company means that you have to be perfect. And I think that it's what we're talking about here is what's most important about is like being honest and leaning into the things that you do well and finding ways through and people around you to help pull the like pieces of the puzzle together. And so I think that it's just so great to hear. And it's oftentimes people who are at the top, air quotes at the top, they're like ego can get in the way so much that it can't even be part of the conversation. And, this is where I think we can really learn from each other. And that gives us some freedom in the journey to not be perfect, to screw up, to have a certain trait that's it isn't the best, or isn't, isn't what you think you would need in that role.
Yeah, no, listen, my effort is more of, I wish I knew these things earlier on. And it's not like I knew this all the time, or I operated this way and thought this way. I mean, I think I've gotten to a point of it, and I can't stress enough that I've learned to put myself in situations that I can be that way, that I can be that open, or I can be this honest. And there are still scenarios that come up today where the other switch turns on, and I just realize like that's not where I'm going to be the best, and it's such a critical lesson that I've had to learn the hard way many times, to finally go, I'm not going to be good in that situation. So either it's for somebody else or someone from my team or someone in my life, like this is better for them. I'm going to stay over here because this is where I'm comfortable and I'm good at this. And, I can't learn everything and be everything and do everything for everybody. It's literally just not possible. Right. So let me just stay in my little bubble. I'm cool with that. I'm cool with staying in my bubble. And that's where I like to live life right now.
Well, I'm glad you brought us into the bubble for this episode. And no, I mean, it's just, like I said, it's so great to have, it's so refreshing to have such an open conversation and, to learn with and from and through each other. So, I think that I'm curious, you work in this AI space. And so it is so much about it. I want to say it's futuristic, but it's not because you created it, but I'm also like, it is helping to create the future leaders, the things that you have in place now. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are about looking forward, as, what do you think that as future leaders, those of us who are, continuing to evolve, the next gen, as you mentioned earlier, what do you think that we're going to see, and what do you think that some of the things that we're going to need?
Yeah, I feel like the accuracy of technology is exponentially going to get better. I feel like if I look at the last 5 to 10 years, we've dabbled, and there's some really, really smart things going on that the more we can be comfortable and know our place and know the place of technology as something to enable us to be better, whatever kind of leader role, even a management role or something, and a frontline employee, like the more comfortable we become with that, I feel like that's where we're going. And the people who continually let their egos get in the way, or let fear get in the way, or let being too comfortable get in the way, those are the people who are going to unfortunately probably fall by the wayside. And I think it's gonna go much faster than it has over the last 5 to 10 years, where we will see a rapid development of change in workforce of people who are unwilling to adapt. I think it'll be unfortunate, but I feel like it is something that's going to happen because there's a bit of a lag of getting people very comfortable with the world we actually live in. And I don't know the reason for that, but that's just my gut sense. Like, as I talk to people, I can just see the fear in a lot of people. And I think as a leader in any capacity, we almost have to just let that go. So what if something goes wrong? So what if you lose your job because of it? So what? Like there are solutions to get you out of it. If you hold yourself back from accepting the use of things like artificial intelligence, and listen, there's going to be mistakes. There's things that are going to go wrong. It's not going to be as accurate, but the rapid pace in which it is getting smarter, with the way technology is getting smarter and more advanced, I'm more encouraged to see people who are like, yeah, let's try it and see what happens. And, like I said, for me, the skill of learning technology and building technology, it's just because I believe that's where things are really going. I think we need craftsmanship and these other things, but for me, I've always embraced technology at a very young age. I was just interested in it, and I'm always surprised by the amount of leaders that are in very high impact roles who are making decisions based off of fear or their ego against technology. And I think that is a mistake. I think those are the people who will get replaced at some point in the near future. This is my personal opinion.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. And we use the word fear throughout this conversation. And I think that it just makes me think of something that I often remind myself of and have to catch myself at times and ask myself, am I moving from a place of fear, or am I moving from a place of strength?
Yeah.
And, there's a big pendulum there. But when I catch myself having a reaction, or, start to take action, and I can tell it's from a place of fear, I have to stop and pause. And it's like, there's discomfort in having to learn new things sometimes. And there's discomfort in having to, as you're saying, adopt technology and figure things out. And, I think, but again, like, as those of us who are listening to this, it can be a great thing to ask ourselves, like, am I moving from a place of fear? Because that's just not a winning proposition, in my opinion.
I would agree with you. I would agree. I don't feel it's a winning combination at all of skill in any sense. But I think professionally, people have a huge opportunity. If I think back, the work I was doing 10, 20, years ago, wow, what a luxury we have right now. I mean, there's just so much at our fingertips that we never had. And the people who really embrace it, I feel like, are the ones who are going to propel 5 times faster than what I saw in working in a job or a company in 2 to 10 years. What took 10 years is going to take like 2 now. And I think that's something to really pay attention to as someone is kind of plotting their way through a career path or deciding to be an entrepreneur. No matter what you're doing, I feel like that's the huge enabler at this point. And not just because I'm in that field. I think it's just, I've just seen it. I've watched it personally. And, that always concerns me when I see people who are just so fearful of, wow, you guys are looking at all the messages in the company. It's like, well, what do you have to hide? Why, if it's actually used towards a good cause and it's anonymized, like, why are you so fearful of that? Like, is it going to expose things you don't want to expose? Isn't that the whole point of what we all need as a leader, is for things to get exposed that we can't see so we can solve them and make them better? And that's an example of what I'm talking about, where there's this friction that we see with people professionally at times now. And it's concerning to me. It's concerning to me for them,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would continue this conversation all day, but I know you actually have a company to run. So I like to end the conversations by just asking people, because we do touch on so many different things, but if there's 1 or 2 key takeaways that you really hope people have from your episode, what would one of the 1 or 2 things be?
I would say one we hit on a few times is just own the traits that you have. They're innate things that are born into you or a part of your life journey, and whether it be good or bad things, just embrace them and understand them and work around them. I think that is, I would take a leader who knows that over any skills they have any day. Number 2 is, fear is definitely an enemy. I think just building confidence about making mistakes and knowing that you can get through them, you're going to learn more and propel faster and have bigger and greater impact if you lose that fear. It's hard for people to let that go, but I think it's such a big item to just let go. Those are my 2 takeaways that I would say to my younger self. That's the way I look at it.
Well, I am so glad that you spent time with me today, that you spent time sharing with our audience.
Thank you.
I had so many notes that I took during this call. So you are an inspiration to me as well. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. All right, I'll talk to you soon.